As Mrs. Lewis transports Duncan back to his home from the hospital in chapter 1413, she grows more and more irate and furious. She finds it difficult to comprehend Duncan's growing affections for Liberty, who is a divorcee. Regardless of Liberty's prior marriage, Mrs. Lewis demonstrates her dislike of her as a future daughter-in-law by slapping Duncan's arm in a fit of rage. She lashes out at Duncan because she believes that Liberty's lack of interest in him is an indication of his own flaws. Duncan, however, is unperturbed by his mother's rage and keeps his composure. He argues that Liberty is a good lady, despite being a divorced single mother to support his attraction to her. Sonny, Liberty's son, piqued Duncan's curiosity at first, but he has since come to appreciate Liberty for herself. Before Duncan can complete his sentence, Mrs. Lewis smacks him once more, chastising him for his lack of shame. Sonny's paternity is called into question by Mrs. Lewis, who knows that Sonny's last name is Brown and not York. She rebukes Duncan for having the audacity to compare himself to Sonny. In addition to expressing his hope that Sonny were his own child, Duncan emphasizes that all he wanted to say was that Sonny is intelligent like him. He embraces the fact that Sonny is not his own child, nevertheless, and accepts his new job as stepfather. He is under the impression that if he is kind to Sonny, the boy will come to see him as his father. As their conversation goes on, Mrs. Lewis and Duncan's resentment grows. Mrs. Lewis is upset because she worries about the social repercussions of Duncan's decision, and she is afraid of being rejected by Liberty. She takes offense to Duncan's interest in a woman she thinks is unfit to be her daughter-in-law. Duncan, though, is still eager to accept his duty as a stepfather and is steadfast in his affections for Liberty. The chapter emphasizes the conflict between Duncan's resolve to follow his heart and the traditional beliefs of Mrs. Lewis. It prepares the ground for potential confrontation and additional investigation of the changing bonds between Duncan, Liberty, and Sonny. The possibility for Duncan and Liberty's unusual family dynamic and the effects of the opposition of Mrs. Lewis are left up to us to speculate about.